So we're here to solve this Kurotto puzzle, Empty Columns, by Prasanna Seshadri. Prasanna wrote a really beautiful Kurotto book for us just at the end of last year. If you haven't checked it out, you really should. It has a lot of elegant themes, just like this solving path that you're going to run into in this challenging puzzles examples. I think for this puzzle, the two main notations I'll certainly be shading and surfaces as usual for the style, but I'm going to turn on numbers again because there's a particular part of the solving path that you can see right at the start, which is that we can mark sometimes the size of groups growing out from these spaces, and it's pretty clear there's a 10 large group coming out of this space, which leads to a 9 large group coming out of this space, which will lead to an 8 large group coming out of this space, and there's by default a 7 large group coming out of there. And so the start of the center row is a lot of limitation in the grid, and also the tension that these groups give, like this 9 group can't come just to the cells above it, the 8 group can't come just to the cells above it, and this 9 also can't come all the way around this 8 to the top, so it's got to start to come down to the bottom a bit. When this 8 is to the right side of the 9, 8 plus 1 is valuable, but 8 plus 9 isn't possible, and so you can recognize that there's, for instance, going to be a singleton here, and these will keep growing out. This is now 7 to the left of an 8, so we're going to need to have a 1 just above it, so we can mark that in. This is another 8, and probably touching straight to the left of what's there, but we'll think through that group when we're a little farther into the puzzle. We can mark the singleton 1 here, and we can mark where this 9 has to keep coming down and around. It can take as many as 7 cells as we've marked here, but we're going to have this situation of the value to the left still panning out. The 10 has to keep coming up. We're going to get to where we need to have a 7 large group and a 3 large group coming uniquely out of these single spots. And the 3 is pretty easy to pack. The 7 is a little trickier, but one thing I see, and here's another notation that is useful on paper, edge, helper X lets me mark borders between cells like this, and these will just be a marking I'll use to say that the shaded groups can't cross both of these cells. In this case, the 10 group that's coming up can take the left cell, but it couldn't take further to the right. There's actually a case where with this cell being shaded as part of the 3, one of the tensions is getting this 10 to come all the way through the grid but not block off this space. So for instance, the 10 can't take this cell. So there are effectively edges right here for where the 10 can go. And so the 10 will always take this cell right here. And in taking that cell, you'll recognize that now one or both of the next cells it takes are going to put effectively a 10 around this 14. And the 14 will want to end up being 10 plus 4. And the only place the 4 can be shaded is right here. And so that's going to place another situation where these now are also edges you can mark off. And in recognizing those limitations, there are now effectively just 10 cells that you can take in total, which are these. You can't come up and touch to the 4. You need to leave room for the 3 to the left, and leave space for the 7 to the right. And so that limited placement is the path right now through the grid, and a place where in some of these harder Kurotto puzzles, just trying to place as much as you can, fill the space is probably quite limited. You're going to run into the constraint of how there's only one unique way to fill it in. Moving these 7 cells further out, we now have a single cell more we've got to place around this 8, and putting that in, we get a single cell we need around the 5, and this, which is going to have 6 cells in total, all the way over there. This group with 6 is going to have to match with this group with 7 and another group with 7, and these two 7s are distinct. So there's going to be some crowding that's pretty key here. Note that if you take this cell, you've crowded down this upper right group to only have 5 possible for it, so this can't be used. So these come like so. This 7 now only has 7 cells it can take with 1 as a gap to let it fill in, and the 6 has exactly 6 cells to go. So we've gotten that much progress in the grid by just really thinking through the constraints that are most limiting in this moment in time. We now can think again about, say, these 8s, and we talked about how trying to just fill things in when they look to be pretty forced or constrained will be useful. notice that we're going to have an 8 coming from this lower right corner, and one, most likely one more, not two more 8s from here, and they're not going to touch this 4 in any way, so there's effectively some boxes that you can kind of put around this that are probably limits. They're not actually as required as these limits up above, but we have a total, if we think about the counts here, of 6, 10, 14, and 5 more, 19 cells, and they're going to have to be split across 16 in 2 groups of 8 with some split between them. And the thing to recognize is that if the split were, for instance, over here, by the time you're splitting apart these groups, you've really taken a big group and a small group as opposed to 2 equally sized groups. And so it's more likely that these 6 cells up top are part of the 8, and now we have to find an efficient way to get the remaining cells in that put some gaps between them. And so we would love to still keep this as a shaded cell, so let's mark this as unused. And now we still have to take 2 more cells in this group, and there are 2 ways to do that. We can take these 2 or these 2, but in both cases this isn't used. And now the last constraint is to really think through how to get the count of 8 to be valid, and that's here. And so this is just given that there were 19 cells and 3 of them had to be unmarked. This is, by logic, the only actual way to tightly pack the lower right corner, fulfill all of these clues. And if you don't see exactly what to do it, just try to shade some of the alternatives. And I think the logic as you shade in the alternatives will really help you get these force constraints more quickly. So coming back to that, that means the 4 has to come immediately to the left. Around this 11, we need to get 2 more total cells, and there's no value which is taking 2 from a single space anymore. So it's got to be this, and that's going to put another value 4 here in the bottom. The 9 still has to take 3 cells, so this is a full shading of a 9. The 7 is over to here. There are 4 cells for it, and that last cell finishes out the grid. So, mostly a puzzle that, while in larger size, is about tracking the pieces of regions as they come together, seeing things like 10 plus 4, 7 plus 1 in different scenarios, this 8 plus 1 really leading to a force constraint over here. Really tight packing in the lower right side to get a unique spacing, but there is unique spacing in the same way there's really tight packing of 2 7s and a 6 in the top for tight spacing. So it uses a whole lot of the Kurotto constraints, and so hopefully by seeing how those apply in this puzzle, you've got some tricks to apply for other puzzles down the road. So we'll see you again soon.